And there are more people actively lying to you now every day than there ever have been before as well, because obviously you're exposed to more media than you've ever been exposed to before, exposed to more voices through that media than ever before. And a good proportion of them are actively trying to deceive you, which is unusual in human societies, by and large. We have a reasonable expectation up until now that most of the people that we encounter in our daily lives are probably telling us some version of the truth, or if they're not telling us some version of the truth, they're acting in good faith.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you very much for joining us for the Q&A for the James J. Dart Book Club. For those who are watching, book is in front of me. It's a brilliant little book, actually. Obviously, you and I have known each other for quite a while, and I've read quite a lot of books on humanism. And I think this is the first one that I've read, which is just like, you can blitz through this in about an hour. And it's almost like a little humanist Bible in a way, isn't it? It's just like quite a...
No.
Well... maybe not the
treasury.
A treasury. Yeah. I'm sure people call it a humanist Bible. I know A.C. Grayling wrote the Good Book, didn't he? Which was supposed to be the kind of humanist Bible in his sort of weird way.
And just as big as the
Indeed.
Bible.
Yeah, this one's not as big as that one. So fantastic little book. So you wrote this with Professor Alice Roberts, who's obviously quite a well-known scientist as well. How did the collaboration of you two come together? I know she's the president currently of Humanist UK. Is that kind of how you guys met? And how did you decide to write this book?
That's right. So she's the president of Humanist UK, the current president, and I'm the chief executive. And when we met shortly before she was appointed, one of the things we both agreed about was the need to have something that was more accessible for people about the humanist approach to life. And obviously her entire career, when it hasn't been sort of straight science, has been public understanding of science, and so she's well versed in the need to communicate in order to persuade and to support people that are in your audience. So she very much was of that mind, and of course that's the whole purpose of Humanist UK, is to reach out to people who might have a humanist approach to life and tell them about what it is, so that they can perhaps recognize it in their own beliefs and values. So it was a great match. We both agreed that this was something we wanted to do, and the publisher thankfully agreed that it was a good idea. So that's how it came about, really, out of a need for an accessible introduction to humanism. We both felt that was necessary.
Yeah. So your audience are predominantly people that are either very new to humanism or just haven't heard of humanism?
Yes, I think so. I mean, obviously there's two audiences, really, I suppose. The first is the people who have heard of it slightly. Maybe they've been to a humanist funeral, that's very common these days, or a humanist wedding, even more common in number now. Millions of people attend a humanist ceremony each year in the UK now. So maybe they've just heard the word, or maybe their children have started learning about it in school. It's a compulsory now in the Wales national curriculum to learn about humanism, and many schools in England also teach about it. They've encountered humanism. Yeah.
I was going to say, I work in a school, and in the school, I was going to send you a photo, actually. There was a photo of you in one of the classrooms I was teaching in recently, and I was like, oh, I know that face, that's Andrew, what's he doing in here? And I had a look, and there was a whole wall of sort of world religions and world beliefs, and humanism was there with your face. Yeah.
Well, so, there you go, you see. I'm not just making it up, it's real. And people, parents hear about humanism from their children because they've learned it at school, or they hear about humanism ceremony, and they want to know more about it because it sounds interesting. It's a word that most people find instinctively appealing because human is good, and so humanism must be good. And so it was for people who might be actively looking, but it was also an attempt to reach people who really hadn't heard much about humanism, might pick the book up. And so the first set of people we targeted by trying to be very accessible, and in some of the content perhaps we'll talk about the choice of content. But the second group of people we tried to appeal to with a beautiful cover, green and gold, and a nice little size, hoping that it would be a sort of Tilside book, exactly. And it is gorgeous.
It is lovely.
The whirling lines have many meanings in different people I've met have suggested different meanings that they might have. But it's very attractive, gold foil, and so we hoped it would be attractive to bookshop magpies who, when queuing at the till, wanted to pick up just a few little more books. They felt they hadn't filled their bag quite yet. And indeed, it achieved that because it became a till-side book for Waterstones, which was boosted a lot of its sales.
Oh, really?
So both for people who'd never heard of humanism and for people who had heard of it but wanted to know more.
Yeah, and for sort of seasoned veterans like myself, I think when I was reading through it, virtually every quote in there I must have come across at some point in my life, but it was just nice to be like, oh yeah, this is why I got into humanism originally, because so much of it just makes sense. And like, obviously you maybe go a year or two without reading any sort of like humanist quotes or something, and you're just like, oh yeah, God, it's nice to just have like a little treasure trove where they all are. So if I'm ever, wanting to talk to somebody about something deep, I can be like, oh, I'll just dig out my little humanism book. I'll be sure there'll be something in there, because it covers quite a big breadth, doesn't it? It covers sort of philosophy, science, politics.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted it to be comprehensive. We wanted it to be light and accessible, and conversational, but we also wanted it to be comprehensive, because we did, intend that this could be a book that if you picked up and read it, you'd know everything there was to know about the humanist approach to life in outline, in essence. That was what we were going for, because some people, will only read one book about humanism, and so we wanted it to be comprehensive. We wanted it to be completely positive. So a lot of books out there about humanism start often from the things that we don't believe in. We're not religious. We don't believe in God. We don't believe in separate creation. We believe that, instead human beings are this, that, and the other. And we didn't want any of that at all. So all of our chapters and the different themes that we chose began from a completely positive description of what humanists do value, what humanists do believe, what humanists do accept about reality and so on. So we wanted it to be very positive. We wanted it to be, like you say, a sort of treasury of the thoughts of others. So about half of the book is our own writing, and the other half, in fact, it's probably more than half, is quotes of humanists. And we wanted that because, first of all, we wanted to show the diversity of humanists. So
and it does. It does that very well, actually. Like the whole breadth of history, all different nationalities,
and through time as well. Exactly. Yeah. So we did want to do that. And you can only really do that through quotes and voices, those people's actual words. And so that was important. But the other thing we wanted to do with the quotes was to demonstrate to people who maybe were more casual readers of the book that a lot of the people they heard of and admired in their lives were humanists. And so we tried to include there a wide range of, scientists, celebrities, novelists, politicians, campaigners, people that people would have heard of, people that readers would have heard of through other content.
Like David Attenborough, obviously big.
Like David Attenborough, exactly. And, novelists like George Eliot or Ian Forster or James Baldwin, novelists that people might have read. James Baldwin's particularly popular at the moment, as part of the renaissance of Black authors, especially. But few people know that he was also a humanist. Gave one of his famous talks to the Cambridge Humanist Group when he visited the UK, as he visited the UK on many occasions. And so just those people that whose humanism often has been written out of their biographies in many ways as well, or who've been sort of recast as having a Christian upbringing, but then their biography is silent as to what they actually then believed for the rest of their life. So we wanted to reclaim some of those people and reframe them properly. And so that's another reason to use lots of quotes. And it was the hardest thing was trying to edit down the quotes.
I can imagine,
to find the optimal number, because we had hundreds of quotes that we wanted to use, and we advertised on Twitter for some more as well while we were writing, which was a big mistake because they flooded in. It wasn't a mistake because we ended up turning up 2 or 3 gems that once we'd properly attributed and sourced them and so on, and made sure they were genuine, did end up there. But the difficult thing was editing it down, really.
I have a question later on the kind of the new atheists, because they're still sort of in people's minds, I think, vaguely when we're talking about humanism. But I'll just stick this one in now. It was quite new atheist light. Was that a decision to? I mean, obviously Dawkins was in there, and there were a few others. Grayling was in there, and bits and bobs. But it wasn't new atheist heavy. Was that a deliberate kind of decision to sort of? Are you kind of moving away from the sort of Hitchens, Harris, Dennett, Dawkins years now? And
I don't think it was a deliberate decision, but I don't think that all of the I mean, the new atheists aren't that new, of course, anymore.
The old new atheists.
Yeah, I mean, I'm as many years away from the new atheists now than I was, when I was born, if you see what I mean, because I think they came, they were sort of in the turn of the century, weren't they, really, after 9/11 and so on. But of course, the people who were part of that publishing phenomenon and social moment, or however you want to think of that, of new atheism, who had interesting things to say both before and since, like Richard Dawkins, for example, about science. And in particular, I think we quoted him on the stimulation of science, the personal fulfillment that it brings.
That's where he's best, I think, when he's talking about
science. It's beautiful writer about, and talker as well, about the inspiration of science. So, he's a very active scientist, very active with Humanists UK for decades before the new atheist phenomenon, right? So, I mean, it was important to have him in there. Anthony Grayling, like you say, obviously, a pivotal modern humanist philosopher and communicator of humanist ideas, whether it was through his old Guardian columns or through his books, which were very popular at the New Atheist time, as you say. Christopher Hitchens, did we not quote Hitch at all?
I'm not sure I saw it.
I feel guilty now.
No. I have his quotable Hitchens book, which is a full analog, a full catalogue of his book quotes. Yeah, so
well, there you go. Then it was unnecessary.
That's true. He's got his own. Yeah.
Maybe we didn't actually. Maybe we didn't. No, I think you're right. And Sam Harris, I don't think he's a humanist, is he? Some sort of.
Well, he was very much part of the new atheist groups, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we do quote Dan Dennett.
You may do. You may have done.
Yeah.
Might have missed that one.
I know we did in the Little Book of Humanist Weddings, which is forthcoming this year as a sort of follow-up to that book.
Brilliant.
I know we quoted him there because he's got some good line on tradition and remaking tradition, which was a very humanist idea. And so we definitely quote him there. But no, it wasn't a deliberate decision. It is, of course, though, a book about humanism rather than about atheism.
Of course, yeah.
And I think that although we have one short chapter on religions, because people do want to know what humanists think about religions, and we try to give a very broad range of humanist views, because there are some humanists who don't mind religions that much, and are quite sort of religion friendly in lots of ways. Baroness Whitaker is a humanist working peer in the House of Lords and has done a lot of work in international development. I think we quoted friendly towards religion. And then there's some humanists who just hate religion completely. Emma Thompson, I think we quoted on this.
Yeah, hers was funny.
Yeah, it was more take by surprise. You see, we could have quoted Richard Dawkins saying, I hate all religion and it's despise it. But if you've got Emma Thompson to quote, why not? Because it takes you by surprise, and she's saying almost exactly the same thing. I think she outreached Dawkins to Richard there, actually.
I think she did. Yeah.
But we tried to avoid religion really because it's actually not relevant. And I think one of the things that we wanted to demonstrate to people was that, although the humanist approach to life is not a religious one and is non-religious, we don't need to think that much about religion in order to pursue it. In fact, it would be best really if we forgot about religion in order to talk about humanism. I really believe that. And I think actually that as time passes and fewer humanists of today have Christian upbringings, the difference between, one of the big differences between our generation of humanists, at least if I think about people who work at and are involved in Humanists UK, and the generations before us, is that we're the first to almost invariably not have had a religious upbringing, and the weight of religion in their background, especially it seems former Catholics, who are slightly older in years, is very heavy on them, and sort of makes them humanists of older generations. I mean, makes them much more interested in religion and in taking it on actively than I would be personally. For me, it's just rather beside the point. You've got to campaign to mitigate and eliminate the social and political harms that religions do and the personal and moral harms they do to individuals. But I don't think that you need to do much more than that, really, and certainly not to define yourself by what you're not.
I totally agree. Actually, from my experience in schools in the last 12 months, in the school that I teach at, we've discussed it at different times in the books we've read and stuff. And there's just no, there's, it's more apathy than anything else. There's quite a lot of ignorance as well, because people are just not biblically literate anymore. I remember I think I mentioned Moses, and there were just blank looks around the room like, who the hell is Moses?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So
how old are these children?
They're secondary school. So I think that was a year 7 or year 8 class, but
white working class area, that sort of
demographic. Yeah.
That's quite with the national trend. Yeah. But I think you should know who Moses is, really. It's important to learn who Moses is.
They didn't.
As important to know who Moses is as who Zeus is, or Hercules, or whatever. Maybe there'll come a time when children's books will play with, Jesus stories in the same way that they play with Percy Jackson type Olympian god stories, and Moses will have a renaissance. Although I don't think it's very likely, because Bible stories aren't really as interesting as other myths, are they? So probably children will never be made to enjoy them on their own.
I don't know. I think you could probably jazz them up. I reckon you could jazz them up.
Yeah, you could. I think. What did Moses do? He parted the sea, didn't he? And that's quite a good story.
What was the burning bush? Who was the burning bush? Was that Moses?
Was he the burning bush? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's not that exciting, really, is it? It's just like we've got a lot of them going on in the world right now. I mean, I don't know.
It's certainly not like the Cyclops or the Trojan horse or something.
No.
Not as exciting as that, or the Norse gods.
No, it's true.
But maybe it will have a renaissance. Could Jesus ever become a superhero like the Greek gods have become superheroes?
Well, in South Park, he is one of the superheroes. Him and Stan, I think and he's framed as a good guy in that. Really, he just takes on the bad guys in a kind of funny kind of way. South Park, I think, have done Christianity probably a favor. Well, actually, I say that
do you?
Well, the episode they did on the Catholic priests where they were all pedophiles was a pretty pretty heavy one.
Well, it keeps it relevant anyway, I suppose. It keeps religion relevant.
Sure. So in the book, you've added in Bertrand Russell's liberal decalogue. Of which 3 I've just written down here. Do not feel certain of absolutely anything. Never try to discourage thinking. Be scrupulously truthful. Are these methods or values, do we see a lot of those in modern British society in 2021? I look at the people at the top in government, I look at the media, I look at social media, thinking for oneself, being truthful. What would Bertrand Russell think of Britain in 2021?
Well, that's a very big question. I can't answer that. I think he'd probably be glad we're all still alive and we haven't all been nuked to damnation.
Yeah, he was quite about that, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was worried about that. Yeah. But and I think he probably would be quite pleased about our attitudes towards sex, I suppose. Our attitudes towards sex, he's very concerned about that, much more liberal. Attitudes towards marriage, much more liberal. I don't know what you think of our education system. It probably is not quite as the sort that he would want, better than it was in the past. I think he'd be quite pleased generally.
Yeah.
50 years from now, again, who knows? But these ideas that from his liberal decalogue of thinking and of truth, are people thinking for themselves? I think more people today, I tell you what, more people today seem to think that they're thinking for themselves.
Yeah, they do your own research, hashtag.
Do your own research, yeah. I mean, you can't speak to anyone who is uninformed and ignorant without them telling you, I've done my own research and I've read this myself.
30 minutes on YouTube, doesn't it? Down some rabbit hole.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I was talking to someone who was very anti-vaccines and anti-lockdowns recently, and they said, look, I've done my own research and I've read articles on BMJ articles on the internet. Okay, maybe you have, but that doesn't mean you've understood them. I mean, so I think people do think that they think for themselves, but I suppose that and there's a chapter on this in the book, not in the chapter that the liberal decalogue is in, but in another chapter called Thinking Clearly. And it was important to us actually to include a chapter on thinking clearly, which not many books about humanism do. They tend to talk about science and reason, but they don't talk about necessarily about, thinking, how to think. And the reason we did that is precisely because my answer to your question is, probably not. Those things aren't very common now in society, or as common as they should be. Whether they ever have been, I don't know. But of the valuing of the truth and thinking clearly, they are obviously under threat. All sorts of reasons. Of course, religion's one of them, but it's not probably the most important of them. Firstly, people have begun to doubt whether there is such thing as truth. You know, they start thinking, well, my truth is my truth, and I don't care. You know, about I won't change my mind about that. I've done my own research, and I'll never do it again. You know, that sort of belief that there can be different truths for different people. Knowledge has become, in many areas, you know, very politicized and very tribal, and that's a great problem. So people will continue to, you know, be biased towards the views of their group or whatever, or the views that make them feel better, and that's just added to all the other cognitive biases that we all have and have always had about things, which we deal with in the book. And there are more people actively lying to you now every day than there ever have been before as well, because obviously you're exposed to more media than you've ever been exposed to before, exposed to more voices through that media than ever before. And a good proportion of them are actively trying to deceive you, which is unusual in human societies, you know, by and large. We have a reasonable expectation up until now that most of the people that we encounter in our daily lives are probably telling us some version of the truth, or if they're not telling us some version of the truth, they're acting in good faith. You know, they're not actively trying to deceive us, because that's how human societies work. Human societies wouldn't work if we lived in groups where everyone was trying to deceive each other all the time, and there was no such thing as shared truth and shared knowledge and shared understanding and cooperation. And
which is what George Orwell tried to show us, wasn't it? Really, in his book.
We quote him in the book, of course, as
Indeed.
well. I can't remember what we quote him on, but you know, so yes, I think as the search for truth is rare and clear thinking is rare, and I think we all need to be more careful about it, because even when we encounter sources of different types, even if we think we're being open-minded and critical and doing our own research, we're often not being critical and not thinking critically. And I'm sure that you and I are as susceptible to that as anybody else. I see frequently on the internet, for example, people who I basically agree with spreading misinformation, as it were, in a good cause, you know, and I'm sure that everyone is up to that all the time now. And so
I think I agree with you.
Media, probably it's media.
I think people just feel like they have to get in the trenches now, and there's not enough time to sort of take a step back and to do, you know, to check every source and every bit of information. I'm sure I've definitely shared stuff myself and then had to go back and later delete it when people have pointed out that it was wrong or something. But because this kind of culture war moment that we seem to be in this country, incredibly partisan and quite worrying if you're sort of left of center like me, where you've got people in power who appear to be acting in really bad faith, you know, pursuing their own personal agenda at the expense of communities and stuff. I just feel like there's a lot of panic, and people just want to constantly be climbing into the trench to sort of like, you know, take them on. And I don't know what your thoughts on that, because I view humanism as
very important not to panic.
It is important not to panic, but it's easier said
than done.
Important
to remain calm.
Yeah. Is that the humanist approach, really?
I think that, well, if we all didn't panic and remained calm and engaged with each other rationally, and attempted to, you know, in good faith to discuss our differences and seek a resolution, obviously that would be a better world. So yes, that is, you know. Is that
doable? Is that doable on Twitter, though? That's the question.
That's a good question.
Because for instance, Richard Dawkins is a nightmare on Twitter, isn't he? He's brilliant in a lot of other configurations, but he often gets himself in trouble on Twitter, doesn't he? I mean,
you know, I think the thing about Twitter is that absolutely no one can look at a tweet and completely understand the context of it. You know, you don't know what the person's doing, where they're sitting, where they're standing, what's just happened to them, what they're thinking of, what's in their mind, what this sentiment that they've sent out into the world is apropos of. You know, you've got absolutely no way of knowing that. And what we see again and again, I think, is people importing their own context to these short statements that people see online. And I think that is a big mistake. And that probably is where the large majority of the problems arise. And I think it's equally true. So that's as it were at the point of reception. When we read tweets, these are all the things that are going wrong. We just don't know, and we import our meanings and so on. There's also, I think, however, the same problem with the messenger, the person who is tweeting it, that, so many of us don't think to ask those same questions ourselves. Will people understand what I'm saying? Is this just, am I in a bubble? And so if anyone sees this, it won't even make sense to them because they're so far from where I am myself right now that it'll look like something else, and I think that is a real problem on social media. But I don't think this is possible on Twitter. Well, everyone would have to change a lot in order for these things that we've just talked about, that we need to value more, like reasonable discussion and so on, to be able to be practiced on Twitter. So no, perhaps they can't be, but they can be practiced elsewhere. I mean, they can be practiced elsewhere where they're currently not, like in our politics, like in the resolution of difficult issues. Think about something like statues and all this hullabaloo about statues, and specifically the idea that somehow they need to be protected, or there needs to be some sort of new criminal offence brought in to deal with them, or even the idea they need to be torn down, right? So if you look at a problem like that, why isn't it an automatic reaction of people who are in a position to make decisions about this to say, let's have some sort of reconciliation commission about this, let's look at these issues, let's discuss them, let's understand what people want from different sides? If that had been done, for example, and followed through in relation to Bristol, the outcome there might have been very different with the slavers statue that many of us probably felt quite good seeing thrown into the sea. Wouldn't necessarily have had to be done as a result of mob action if there'd been some sort of process where people could reasonably discuss these things, and then the outcome could be properly implemented, which of course is what was missing there. Then that would be much better, wouldn't it? But instead of that, people rush to particular positions, and they don't even attempt to set up any sort of process. And when you ask yourself a question of why not, it's very difficult to find a full set of answers to that question, I think. I suppose it's sort of because it's not in any people, no one sees it particularly as being in their interest to have such a process. And I think that's a problem, in that if we say we want to have rational discussion and good faith disagreements and try to resolve difficult situations in as positive a way as possible for everyone involved, in accordance with particular values, of course, and that's important, is that we don't give up that core values of liberal democracy, rule of human rights, and equal treatment, then I think that then we have to ask ourselves the question of, well, why didn't that happen? And no one saw it as being in their interest. And I think this is the problem, is that there are a whole set of values and virtues. We're drifting away from the book now.
We are a little bit, but there's
a whole there's a whole set of values and virtues which are more procedural than substantial. They're sort of like the way you do things, the methods by which you come to do things, and they really matter because they're not just procedural in a bureaucratic sense. There's values in the procedure that matter. If you commit to a procedure that is open, that is democratic, that is rational, that is a good thing to do, whatever the outcome is, right? So, but people, I think, focus in some of these debates purely on the outcome that they wish to achieve, and devalue the process by which they may get there or they may not, but which will be of equal worth, i.e. some sort of open, deliberative process that everyone who has a different stake in these issues could participate in. That would be my idea anyway, but I'm not involved in politics now, and so I can't really say whether that would ever be achievable, but it's how I would always seek to resolve disagreements, in my own personal life or in work or in other voluntary organizations that I'm a part of. And so I think that some of that at the national level on some of these difficult situations would be very welcome.
I mean, I totally agree. But I think you said there it would require on the part of the people in charge a kind of, well, firstly, good faith and a belief in democracy. And I'm sure you know my opinions on a lot of this stuff already. But
you're very disillusioned about democracy in the United Kingdom.
Somewhat, but not totally. But the problem that I have is basically just the ERG in this government. I think they are uniquely dangerous politicians who deliberately exploit division and exploit and rile people up and scaremonger. And they're not looking to reconcile people. They're not looking to bring people together. They feed it and exploit it, and their friends in the press do the same. And it's incredibly corrosive to democracy. And I bang on about this a lot on my platform because it concerns me, and I don't see it getting any better currently. If anything, it looks to be getting, after Brexit, even worse. They're still using these same tactics. But you're right. Under David Cameron, under Brown, under Blair, under Major, politicians were to an extent looking to bring people together and to bridge divides. And
Brown was a good example of that. I think that's right. I mean, if you think about if the work that Gordon Brown's government was doing towards the end of his premiership, when they started looking at the British statement of values and a possible constitutional convention and the work that they were doing. I mean, a number of humanist philosophers had been lined up to participate in that work, which was very positive when they were looking at shared national values and political commitments, which is sort of seen as being preliminary to some serious work on the constitution that I suppose that government would have undertaken had it been elected, which it wasn't in 2010. But I don't know about the present government. I can't speak, but that there isn't much evidence at the moment. I agree that reconciliation would be the keynote of their ministry.
No, and that's about as far as you're able to say as the chief exec.
I don't want to be party political.
Exactly, of a non-partisan organisation, of course. No, I respect that. So in the book, let's go back to the book. In the book, there's a big thing about the Golden Rule. So the Golden Rule, as is noted in the book, is something that predates Christianity and the Bible by a long time. It's found all over the place, isn't it? It's found in Egypt and China and India and all sorts of it. But then you go on later in the book to talk about it's not enough just to have empathy, you've got to have reason as well. So is this what sets humanism apart from other worldviews? Is this kind of combination of empathy and reason the kind of USP of humanism? Is that the crux of humanism ultimately?
That's an interesting point of view. I've never considered it that way. You're right that a certain level of reciprocal behavior is a feature of every ethical worldview. Mm-hmm. And that's really what the Golden Rule embodies, this idea of reciprocity. And it's no surprise that human communities all over the world and all over time should have evolved that rule for themselves, because we're social animals and society's just not going to work unless there's reciprocity, at least among the members of the immediate tribe.
Yeah, of course.
So I mean, that's just obvious. And to that, and empathy, as you say, is obviously required in order to make sense of that, because you need to understand, especially in a more complicated society, what other people's desires might be different from your own. You need to understand what treating other people as you would wish them to treat you really means, because you might not want cherry pie for tea, and I do, and so giving you cherry pie isn't fulfillment of the Golden Rule. It's giving you what you want that's fulfillment of the Golden Rule. So you're right about that being common really to almost any codified and certainly any written down and thought through system of ethics. That's common to them. Is reasoning through something that's distinctive of the humanist approach? Well, I don't know if it's completely distinctive, because there might be other approaches to life that I'm unaware of that prize it as highly, but it certainly is prized very highly by humanists. And it's a really important feature of humanist ethics and of moral decision making, because firstly is an expression of confidence that human beings are able to think through, important subjects like that, and that's a very important aspect of the humanist view. The idea that this is possible, this is something we can do. If we think hard, we can come to better outcomes for as many people as possible. So that commitment to that idea, I think, is very distinctive of the humanist view. The idea that morality should consist of no, that morality is not right. The idea that right decision making will come out of thinking through the consequences of our actions and applying reason to problems in that sense is definitely very distinctive of a humanist point of view. And so I suppose to that extent that's right. And I suppose together with the application of reason goes the understanding of context, which is extremely distinctive of a humanist point of view on moral decision making. The idea that no two moral decisions are actually ever the same, not completely the same. They might be 99% similar, but never completely the same. And so you can't just follow automatic rules. You have to apply reason to understand the specifics of the problem in front of you. You have to think about the consequences of them, but also the different facts of the case, in any given circumstance. I think to be so rational as that in relation to moral matters probably is distinctively humanist. But I think the most distinctive thing about the humanist view is in relation to morals is really the view of moral equality. The idea that every human being really does matter by virtue of their humanity alone. There are other schools of thought in human history who have also claimed that every human being matters, although they've seldom lived up to that claim. Their basis for that sort of claim is usually something like, well, because God loves us all equally, or we were all created equally by God, or something. Whereas the humanist basis for that, for the claim that every human being matters, is made on the basis of their humanity alone, and it really comes back to the idea that you matter, I matter. When I'm sitting here thinking about anything, almost my unquestioned, almost completely unquestioned, is this assumption that actually I matter, because I do believe that. I sit here, I think about my wants, my wishes, and I try to fulfill them and so on, and I think that I should be happy and have the opportunity to be so. And it's my understanding of that fact about me as one human being that gives me the moral imagination to think that other people matter too. They matter at least to themselves. It also matters to me and to others, but they matter, and they have and should be treated therefore as equals in moral calculations and as bearers of equal dignity, just by their humanity alone, not because of any other source. And you find these days, it's very common these days, as they sort of mount a sort of second wave against the secularization of the Western world. It's very common these days for Christian apologists to just claim things like, no one ever cared about equal human dignity until Christianity came along, and it was the first ever way of looking at things that made people universally sort of equal. Well, this is obviously nonsense, because history plainly records that this is not the case. That this same sentiment is being expressed all over the world in all sorts of different ways, and even in the pre-Christian European world. In fact, where did the Christians get the idea from? I mean, come on, So this is a great fallacy, but I do make a similar sort of claim for the humanist approach, which is that the humanist approach is the first one that really has said that every human being really does matter equally, and given a consistent reason for thinking so, which is the one I've just given. So I think that's probably for me the most distinctive thing about humanist approach to morality and to ethics. Not the application of reason as such, although I agree with you, it's extremely distinctive of a humanist approach.
And I guess that's what separates atheism from humanism, because people have said, Hitler was an atheist or not. I mean, I don't think he was. That's debatable. And various communists, but then who committed great crimes against humanity because they did view certain outgroups as where they dehumanize certain outgroups. So
exactly, that's right.
That's what separates a sort of a non-religious nut job from a non-religious humanist, I guess.
Yes, I mean the essence of that of the humanist approach is that moral commitment, together with the other things like commitment to accepting the scientific teaching about the nature of the universe and so on, and a sort of existential belief that our life is our own creation and there's no external source of meaning and so on. So there's lots of strings to the humanist bow, as it were. But you're right. What might what makes it clear that the humanist approach is not just can't be synonymous with atheism is precisely that. You can be a really nasty atheist, obviously you can be. You can be Pol Pot, or just as you can be a really nasty religious person and massacre thousands of people as well. So yeah,
but it would be tricky for a genuine humanist to end up being a mass murderer, wouldn't it? If they were sticking to the philosophy of humanism, it would be doable.
That's right. And of course, there's a little bit unfair because we're sort of comparing apples and pears, because humanism is not analogous to Christianity, let's say, because the word humanism is applied post hoc to a set of beliefs and values that already exist. So humanist it describes a certain set of values and beliefs. It doesn't describe an identity. So whereas someone might say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, and then go about doing all these sort of terrible things, and maybe some other Christians go, oh, he wasn't really a Christian, because if you were a Christian you would never do these things. Well, maybe, but actually if they self-define as a Christian and they use Christian justifications for the things that they do, and they see themselves as part of Christian society, other Christians think they're Christians and so on, then what are they? Whereas with humanists you could never really do that, because there has not yet been a society where people have identified as it being a humanist society, and so we haven't had to face the tough questions of what happens when the word that describes your worldview gets attached to an identity group, and then people claiming to be of like mind go off and do dreadful things. So that's lucky in a way, but it's also not just luck. It's a fact of that the word humanist is doing something different in language than the word Christian is, or the word Muslim is. It's describing a set of beliefs and values, as it were, analytically, rather than inventing those beliefs and values and attaching a word to it.
I'm going to stick this one in. Where would you say is, which country in the world would you say is the most humanist in outlook and values and belief?
Well, there's the World Value Surveys and other instruments seem to indicate that countries like New Zealand and Norway, and also Britain to Scotland in particular, have high levels of humanist beliefs and values. In Britain as a whole, about a third of people, according to polls by YouGov and Ipsos Mori, have humanist beliefs and values in combination. All at the time. You see what I mean?
We haven't seen the census data yet for the UK, the most recent one, have we?
No, the census data is pretty rubbish though, because it just tells you what people identify as if you ask them what is your religion, which means that a lot of people who don't have any religious beliefs or religious practice or religious identity end up ticking a religious box. Value surveys are much more. It goes back to what I was saying a moment ago. The word humanist describes a certain approach to life, a certain set of values, and so value surveys are the best places to find it. And by and large, it's those countries. I think they're about the top three actually: New Zealand, Norway, Britain, the Netherlands, of course, ranks very high. Then you get some countries that have high levels of, as it were, humanist values, but low levels of rationalism. I can't quite think of one off the top of my head, but if you look at the data, you do see that. So you see in the UK as well, actually, of the 4 questions that YouGov asks to sort of determine a humanist. They're multiple choice questions, and they're things like, which of these comes closest to your own view? Science gives us what we need to understand the universe. Religion gives us what we need to understand the universe. You can't have one without the other, or like a range of things, right? And although only a third of people give the humanist answer to all those questions, over 60% of people give the humanist answer to at least one of those questions. So you can already see sort of what an interesting discussion that could turn into in terms of, how would you define someone's beliefs? I mean, how do you define someone who, or do you even seek to put a definitional sort of word on people who have, you know, 2 Christian beliefs and 2 humanist beliefs and 1 Buddhist belief? I mean, you know, what game are we into then?
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I'd like to think that in terms of Little Book of Humanism, anyone would find things in it that would be of value.
Yeah.
As I suppose we would find things of value in short books about other traditions and ways of looking at the world.
Yeah. I mean, this is the view I've had for a long time, really, since I came across humanism, was we are a country of humanists. Certainly a majority of us are ticking, as you said earlier, some of the boxes of humanism. We just don't know what the word means. We haven't come across the word.
I think that's basically right, yeah.
Yeah. I have a question now on the sort of the line between freedom of speech, which is something that humanist societies, student societies, when I was were discussing a lot of freedom of speech, and also sort of social justice, kind of trying to be on the right side of history and fighting what we may see as sort of, you know, toxic culture, you know, people, and, you know, like I'll give you a quick example. When I was studying in Exeter, we had Katie Hopkins come and speak at the university. I loathe Katie Hopkins with a passion. However, there was a debate in the sort of in our humanist group as to whether or not we would sign a petition, or I can't remember exactly what it was. It wasn't no platforming, but we were basically, I was on the side of let's campaign against her when she comes, and there was some on the other side who were like, no, we should go and listen, it's freedom of speech, let her come and let's go and sit and listen to what she has to say. And so there was a schism in our humanist camp on this issue, and I thought about it at the macro level and thought, well, surely this debate must be happening in Humanist UK's office and wider kind of humanist culture. How do we get it right on freedom of speech versus protecting our values?
I think the good thing, or the reassuring thing there is, at least, is as you've described it, there wasn't any serious idea in your group, at least, that you should stop her from coming. The idea was that you should protest against her when she came there, or go and listen to her in a spirit of inquiry. Well, that's a good first step, you know, because there are places where, and there've been incidents where people have said, well, let's just stop them from speaking here. And actually, that's not always the wrong thing to do, or it's not always an unfair thing to do, depending on the context, because you know, we do all have free speech, but we don't all have the right to say whatever we want, wherever we want, you know, whenever we want. And people are invited to places, and other people are not invited to places. And so, you know, a lot of the complaints you get about people being no platformed or cancelled are actually, you know, don't really add up to unfair treatment, really. You know, it's just, oh, I haven't been asked here, or I haven't been asked there, or you know, someone asked me, and then when they became aware of my actual views, decided they didn't want me after all. I mean, that all seems fair enough to me.
Yeah.
So, however, I do think personally that it isn't right to get in the way of other people's lawful speech, and to try and obstruct it and stop it from happening. Lawful speech. And so then when someone actually has arrived, as you say, the question of whether the best thing to do is to go and listen or to protest, well, I think we sort of need people in our society of both types, you know, people who'll go and listen so that they can see the errors in what is said, possibly change their own minds a bit, but certainly in the case of ideas that one disagrees with being expressed, learn what they are in order to be able to counter them and disagree with them, and say to others that you've heard this and this is what they said, and that you would disagree with it thus, you know. So you need people like that. But then also, frankly, if people don't want to do that, it's good that demonstrations should occur to make it clear to others that the things that person has said already, especially if they're a person who's got their views on public record already, such as the person you described, that the things that they've said are wrong, that the things that they've said are objectionable, that the things that they've said, if people took them seriously and acted on them, would cause great harm, that they're ignorant or uninformed views. And I think it's right to also, if you'd like to, have protests about that outside, hand out leaflets about it, have banners about it, and try and raise awareness about one's disagreement with it. So I think both those tactics, I don't see them as being right or wrong. I think that they're both perfectly acceptable ways of expressing yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's basically where I am on it as well. Is I don't have a problem with fellow humanists going and listening to people who are toxic, in my opinion.
Yeah,
but
sure.
At the same time, I would rather be in the gang that are outside with placards.
Leafleting.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. That's good. Yeah. And I mean, I mean, after all, the whole point of expressing a view is to invite disagreement. I mean, no one wants to just say their views and have it just accepted by everybody. So, you know, it's quite right to express disagreement with views that you're hearing or have heard, to, you know, communicate that to others and so on. And that's the way that this sort of conversation proceeds.
Yeah.
In my view, anyway. I think the only reason ever to limit one person's freedom of expression is in order to prevent harm to another person.
And that is the argument, isn't it?
That's the only reason.
That's
of course, people disagree these days about what's harm and what isn't harm.
Well, that's the problem, yeah. So, like, Katie Hopkins used really derogatory, dehumanizing language. I think she called refugees cockroaches or something. Was it the Mail on Sunday or the Sun, wherever it was she was fired from, or Vermin, I can't remember what it was. And I felt that because the language she was used, where she was fired from the Sun, like that's quite hard to be fired from, if you're you know, made her a candidate for, you know, the protest, basically. And
but you are saying protest, are you?
I'm saying protest.
Say that you possibly would have stopped her speaking.
Well, I'm like 90% sure it was a conversation about protest. If it was no platforming, then maybe I've no.
I mean, when you're giving it as an example now, though, because what we've got into is this discussion about harm. And
yeah, that's true. Yeah, so
you might have been about to say. I think you might have been about to say that you could justify silencing her.
That's true. Yeah, that is, I think, what I was.
I think that's what you were getting at.
Yeah.
I think that's very difficult. I don't know about that. I think that incitement to hatred and incitement to intolerance, in this respect, is a notoriously hard case at the edge of what constitutes harm. Yeah. And, you know, Karl Popper's famous paradox of tolerance really is very acute, when he said you can tolerate everything, but when you start tolerating intolerance, that's when, you know, you've
tolerance vanishes.
The whole, yeah, exactly, tolerance vanishes. And I think that's obviously right. And so, you know, I don't know about the things that she said that you're describing, but if, for example, she was stoking up hatred with dehumanizing language, stoking up hatred and intolerance of particular classes of people, for example, refugees, and that you were able to draw a clear line between that and the consequences, then I think you'd have a stronger case for limiting her expression.
Yeah.
But that's a very extreme example. You know, most of the cases we see aren't about that. And it's not the only thing that you've got to take into account. You know, I remember being in a discussion about whether Nigel Farage should be banned from speaking at a university, and I just thought this was completely mad, because whatever his views, he was arguably the most successful politician of the late 20th and early 21st century. He had at that point just won the European elections in the UK, so it must have been 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. I can't remember when the last ones were before
2018, weren't they? Was it
the ones before that?
2014 when he was UKIP.
Yeah, so it would have been a couple of years after that, I guess. He had won the most recent, whenever it was, European elections. You know, and the idea that you would that, you know, almost however vile the things that he said, that you could somehow think it was reasonable to censor him didn't seem to make sense to me, because weighted against the harm that his words might do must have been his significance as a political actor, which you would absolutely want undergraduates on the campus to understand, and hopefully as intelligent people to be able to analyze, and where the things that he said were disagreeable, to find good reasons to disagree with them and to disagree with them, you know.
Yeah.
So I think other things have to be taken into account as well. This topic does come up, as you implied at the beginning of your question, in national humanist organisations and international humanist organisations all over the world, because outside of the United States of America, where their peculiar constitutional history makes some people think that any speech should be allowed, whatever it is, all the time, anywhere. Most nations in the world and most jurisdictions in the world do accept limitations to free expression. And I don't even know, I was talking to Nigel Warburton a couple of weeks ago, who wrote the very short introduction to free speech, and I'm always surprised by how many restrictions he accepts to free expression. Any thoughtful person who thinks about free expression and values free expression for what it should be, which is the way to develop ideas, seek social progress, make sure that authority never can censor reality and the truth, believes that nonetheless there should be limitations when it comes to harm. But so it is a live issue, and in fact, the United Nations has some quite good principles for dealing with hate crime laws, and a series of thresholds that needs to be reached before something could become, as it were, a crime with incitement to hatred. And I think that's the reality. Is it's very complicated. You can't say it's black or white. There may be 6 or 7 factors to take into account and to argue the toss over before you decide whether or not this person's free expression should be curbed.
I agree. It comes down to context again, doesn't it? And nuance, basically, and research.
I mean, some things we all agree about. So, most people agree that libel should be unlawful. That laws against libel should be allowed to limit free expression. Most people agree that harassment and intimidation, direct harassment and intimidation of people, should be prohibited, that no one has free expression to that extent. Most people agree that the free expression of politicians should be limited. They shouldn't just be able to lie without consequence forever.
Wow.
Most people agree that the free expression of teachers should be limited, that they should have to teach a particular curriculum, have to do it in an objective way in various points.
And the civil service.
Most people, and the civil service, most people agree that their expression can be legitimately limited. So, I mean, we accept, I think, there are quite a large number of legitimate limitations on free expression. I think that the important thing about any of them is that, unlike the restrictions of the past on freedom of expression, they're not designed to protect authority, enforce a state-sanctioned opinion, protect people in power, whether religious or political, but are instead to protect any individual from harm. And I think that's the important point. And for most of the history of the UK, we haven't had freedom of speech at all. And right up into the 20th century, there were, extreme laws on sedition, on blasphemy, on censorship of all kinds. And what all those laws had in common is that they were there to protect the powerful and to limit ordinary people's scope of thought. And none of the limits today should that I would entertain would be anything like that. I'd never seek to protect a majority opinion or a powerful institution by curtailing free expression. I would only ever say we must, limitations on free expression to be legitimate would be there to protect real people from real harm in cases where that harm wasn't a preferable consequence to some other harm, bigger harm that might be done if speech weren't allowed, which is where the nuance comes into it, I suppose.
I broadly agree with everything you just said there, and I think this is why I like humanism, because it's
because we're in agreement. Well, that's right. There you go. Add a third person to this discussion.
So sort of at the tail end of the book, there's a bit on death, and death is something, as a 30-year-old, I don't spend too much time thinking about, but it's something that
you must.
It's something that every human at some point in their life will, even when they're little and they first come across the death of a pet or whatever it is, they contemplate, don't they? And I think for me, that was something that I started to spot in all the world religions, was kind of this anxiety about death as being the thing that drew people to those religions, even if they didn't have mostly Christianity, but people had in the family they hadn't read the book, they didn't really know any of the stories, they didn't go to church, but they were kind of Christian because they liked the idea of there being something maybe after death. And so the only reason they were kind of religious was because they liked that tiny aspect of it's just a hack, really, a life hack, isn't it? It's kind of the party can carry on. Humanism,
it's a bad one. That's a bad hack.
Well, I'm about to ask you on this.
It could make you very irresponsible.
Do you have to be a very emotionally strong person to accept that there's no afterlife?
Well, I don't know. I find this a difficult question to engage with because I've always thought that an afterlife just sounds absolutely horrendous, you know, and I just can't, I can't even, I've just been that maybe we're just naturally disposed not to think that sounds like a good thing at all.
Maybe.
It's possible. There have, of course, been societies and even religions where, you know, life after death has not been particularly important. And I've never understood the comfort that people get from it. I suppose the comfort that people get from it is not about their own death so much as the death of others, of course. They like to think, well, you know, this person that I love, although they are dead, they're still happy, they're somewhere, they still exist somehow. And I think that is an important human instinct. And I agree with it. But I think that the way that we can actually rationally accept that truth, which is that the people we love who are dead have not gone, is by accepting that that's because they exist in our own minds still. I mean, I think about this quite often, even in relation to living people. If you think about, I remember thinking when my grandmother died, and that was a very important relationship to me, that I was quite bereft by it, and especially the idea that I could never talk to her anymore. And lots of people have that when they suffer a loss in this way. You know, you have the moment when you're thinking about something, you think, oh, I must tell so and so about this, and then you realize that you can't, right? And that's one of the most acute pangs of loss and of grief. And you know, some people then of course realize that they can, because if you love a person that much, you almost certainly know what they would say in response to your telling them X, Y, or Z. And in your mind, you can have that conversation. And then I thought after that, you know, that's actually quite like the relationship that we have with living people. Because even living people whom we know very well, a lot of our relationship with them is in our mind. You know, we're thinking about what we might say to them, and then we do say something to them, and then we're thinking about it afterwards. You know, our memories of the people that we love, even those who are still alive, are more present to us than the people themselves on a day-to-day basis. And you know, looked at like that, the mere circumstance that they're not actually physically being in this world anymore seems less important. Now, of course, that's only one way of looking at it, because we also grieve in a strange way the person who's died loss of their own life, and you know, wish that they could go on living as well. And so there's more to be said than just this one sort of crumb of comfort that I've offered there about being able to sustain relationships with people who've died, even you know, in your own mind. But I think that those sorts of things are probably a much better way of thinking about our relationship with the dead than to think that they're somehow somewhere else waiting for us, watching us, or whatever. You know, that's probably a better way of dealing with this need that we have for continued connection with the people who've died. And we do have a need of continued connection with people who've died, and it's an entirely healthy need. But I think it would be healthier if we all recognize that need is only ever going to be fulfilled through our remembrances of them, our thoughts about their opinions, the conversations we can have with them still in our heads, and so on and so forth. So that's, I think, the best thing. I suppose when it comes to ourselves and our own deaths, you're right that there is, in some people, a lot of fear. I remember my grandfather was incredibly frightened of death. He just did not want to die.
Yeah.
And Queen Elizabeth I famously paced up and down her bedroom, all through the night and all through the day. She just didn't want to die. Many people really genuinely do fear death. I have a sensible caution about the process of dying, and that, I do hope it won't be painful. I do hope it won't be drawn out. I do hope it won't be undignified. I do hope it won't be unpleasant in all these ways. I hope that it will be as good as possible, as dignified and comfortable as possible. But I've never been able to get myself worked up about being dead, for the simple reason, obviously, that as the old sort of aphorism goes, where death is, you are not. And so there's no reason to be concerned about it.
No.
I thought it was much more concerning if you thought there was an afterlife, because after all, anything could happen then. It could be awful.
Yeah.
It could be.
It could be worse than the Tories. Could be. I know.
You're not going to draw me into any party politics at all.
No, you're good.
Let me caution empathy to you. Even conservatives love and grieve.
Well, so you say. Do you know Boris Johnson personally?
No, I don't know him personally.
No, I'm joking. Well, yeah, of course.
I know you are. But that's what I think about death. And I think this was in a way like an important part of the chapter as well. An important part of that chapter on death was to say, death is the end of personal existence. And then there is comfort and solace and a whole range of thinking about loss and grief, which is incredibly important. But I think the main lesson about death really is that you should think about it, James. You should think about it, and you should come to terms with it. And you should, once you've come to terms with it, go on to live your life, because you'll live a better and a more integrated and a more structured and a more meaningful life if you have accepted that death is the end of it.
Yeah.
And if you understand the narrative of your existence, not
That's
just from the beginning, but to the
Yep.
end as well. I think that's a good lesson. And I do believe that is a spur to moral purpose, to the achievement of worthwhile goals, to a more caring life and to a more fulfilled life.
Yeah, because I think those who genuinely accept that we have one life and it's precious and it's potentially short, make more of an effort to participate in society and in trying to make the most of the time you have, because you understand that it's kind of a fluke. It's really rare, and
well, I certainly think they should. Whether they do, I don't know, but I think they certainly should.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end. I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about Humanist UK, because obviously Chief Executive of Humanist UK. You've written a book on humanism. We've kind of discussed a fair bit of the book and what humanism is. So who is Humanist UK? Tell me a little bit about its history briefly and what it's kind of up to at the moment.
Humanist UK is 125 years old this year. So it's been going for some time and really have three main areas of work. So the first is really to talk about humanism and to reach out and try to connect with that third of the population that we were talking about, who have humanism beliefs and values, but don't know the word, don't know that the beliefs and values they have, together make up a real and impressive worldview, a coherent way of looking at things, not parasitic on the religious beliefs they might have been brought up with, but real and true and shared with many people. And having a dictionary word and a definition for it. So we talk about humanism, that's our primary purpose. But we also provide community services for non-religious people, have throughout our existence. Today, they're things like ceremonies, funerals and weddings, but also pastoral care in places like prisons and hospitals, and then more specific programs of support for people in particular types of need, like, for example, if they're leaving high control religions. So we provide a lot of community services. And then we're a movement for change. We're a platform to advocate for political, legal, social change. And here we focus around freedom of choice, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. But importantly, also the idea that people can only be free in a fair and equal society, because, the barriers to your individual freedom of inequity and of, a lack of democracy and lack of opportunity are very real and are some of the worst. So we focus on those sorts of issues, and for an anti-discrimination specifically as well on grounds of religion or belief in places like our education system, in our political system. A third of our schools in England are still run, although entirely 100% taxpayer funded, are still run by religious organizations. many discriminating admissions on religious grounds and so on. And they're the sort of issues that no one else is really addressing that we seek to address.
Yeah, and actually, I think the whole faith school thing was actually what drew me initially to Humanist UK, because I was looking around and I was expecting maybe the Lib Dems or a group like that to be banging on about it. And although I think they were against faith schools,
they've got policy, but they don't do anything about it.
Exactly. Yeah. At least you guys, it felt like you guys were actually banging the drum for that, and that was an area that I was really interested in, and still, and I know that we've kind of gone backwards because they've scrapped the 50% rule now, haven't they, and stuff.
Yeah, we have gone backwards a bit. We're trying to analyse at the moment quite what that means for the number of school places and the proportion of school places that are religious. But it's gone backwards in England.
Yeah. But no, I mean, you do great work. You do great work on dignity in dying, and
that's an important freedom of choice issue for us. That's right, we do. Well, we need members. We're entirely reliant on members and supporters to fund our work. So if people listening or viewing this want to know more, humanists.uk is the website. Buy the book as well, but go to the website too and see how you can support us.
Yeah, I actually interviewed Dignity in Dying a few weeks ago, and we had a long conversation about the work they do as well. So it was really good, actually. I've not got it up yet, but I will do by the time this one comes out, I think. So brilliant. And then finally, I just wanted to ask you, what are the great challenges facing the world at the moment, and how is humanism equipped? I'm thinking basically about kind of the climate emergency,
right.
And maybe things like the rise of the internet, fake news, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
How can is humanism in keeping with these issues?
I think it is.
Okay,
I think it is. I mean, I do. I think that the big problems of our age are only going to be solved by a rational outlook and a recognition that the human race is one. And I think both those things are absolutely core to humanist view. And so I think these problems will be solved by an application of humanist thinking, whether it goes by the label of humanist or not. And we come back there to the fact that so many people, humanist values are almost like wallpaper in a great part of the Western world. A lot of people are operating by them. Even people who self-define as religious are operating by humanist beliefs and values quite often. So I do think that humanist beliefs and values are the ones that will solve those big crises. Or could solve those big crises, rather. Let's not assume they will be solved. If those crises are solved, it is by these values that they will have been solved, and through this approach, absolutely. And not just those crises, but other ones too. Crises of democracy, the rise of nationalism, tribalism, and especially of ethnic nationalism. These problems too will only be solved by a reassertion and a restatement of humanist beliefs and humanist values, hopefully in a way that can be shared by other people of goodwill too. But yes, I do think that that our approach to life is the one that is best suited through its combination of reason and evidence and of empathy and compassion to solve the big problems of today. Yeah.
So less Modi, more Nehru, less Erdogan, more Ataturk.
No, not so much Ataturk. I think that he's a bit of a wolf in secularist clothing there.
Oh, really?
But yeah, I'm afraid so. But definitely less Modi. Less Modi, less Trump, less Orban, and more. Yes, definitely more Roosevelts, more Nehrus.
So final question. You've talked a little bit about Humanist UK. What can people do? Obviously, you said visit the website. Is there anything people can do if they were listening to this and they've been inspired to get stuck into Humanist UK? Obviously, you guys, if you're still watching this, well done. Buy the book if you haven't already done so. It's definitely, you've got to have it in your arsenal. Those quotes.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
You can. But when you join or sign up to Humanist UK as a supporter, there's so many ways of getting involved. We need people to speak in schools. We need people to organise. We need people to run local groups. We need people to train as celebrants. We need people to do pastoral care. We need people to do research. We're heavily reliant of the 970 personnel we have working under our banner across the country. Only 35 of them are paid staff.
Right. Okay.
And all the rest of the hundreds are, celebrants or volunteers or consultants or contractors or people who are just putting in work on the ground out of love. And that's exactly what we need more and more of. So there are many ways to get involved.
Brilliant. Andrew Copson, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.